Aaliyah Carter sat quietly in her spacious first-class seat, her bright hazel eyes shining with excitement as she gazed out the small window toward the busy runway. It was the very first time she and her younger brother Jayden had ever flown first class. At 12 years old, she could hardly contain her joy, although she tried her best to stay calm, not wanting to embarrass herself or her 8-year-old brother seated beside her. The Jais felt uncomfortable and uncertain, seating herself and resting her arms on the window seat. Jayden's face was pressed close to the window, his eyes wide with wonder as he watched the bustling airport activity, the sleek airplanes rolling along the tarmac, baggage carts racing by, and people in neon-colored vests directing traffic. It was a new world, exciting and vibrant, unfolding right in front of their eyes. "Look at that one, Aaliyah. It's huge," Jayden exclaimed, his small finger pointing toward a gleaming white airplane taxiing down the runway. His voice carried the pure, innocent delight of a child experiencing something extraordinary for the very first time. "I see it, Jay," Aaliyah responded softly, smiling warmly at her brother. She loved seeing him happy, loved the way his excitement made everything feel even more special. This trip was their reward from their father, Marcus Carter, a powerful, successful businessman, known not only for his wealth but for the respect he commanded in every room he entered. He had promised his children a memorable experience if they excelled in school, and both Aaliyah and Jayden had worked tirelessly to make their father proud. As the plane gently vibrated with the soft hum of its powerful engines warming up, Aaliyah adjusted herself in the luxurious leather seat, taking in the unfamiliar comforts around her. The soft blanket folded neatly beside her, the complimentary pair of headphones wrapped carefully in plastic, and a selection of magazines tucked neatly in a pocket by her knees. Everything felt surreal, like something out of a dream. She glanced across the aisle and saw other passengers settling comfortably into their seats. A businessman in a crisp suit was typing furiously on his laptop, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. Nearby, a woman elegantly dressed in pearls gently sipped from a glass of sparkling water, smiling politely at the flight attendant who had just served her. The soft footsteps of flight attendants moving gracefully down the aisle drew Aaliyah's attention. Among them was Ms. Caldwell, an older woman with perfectly styled dark hair pulled back into a tight bun. She wore a bright, practiced smile as she greeted each passenger warmly, engaging them in friendly small talk or simply offering a gentle nod of acknowledgement. Aaliyah watched closely, impressed by the poise and professionalism that radiated from the attendant. She imagined Miss Caldwell must have years of experience, serving countless passengers and handling every imaginable situation with grace. Beside her, Jayden suddenly shifted, pulling gently at his sister's sleeve. His voice was small and timid, a hint of embarrassment coloring his tone. "Aaliyah, I'm really thirsty," he whispered shyly, his eyes apologetic, as if afraid of causing trouble. She immediately reassured him with a tender smile. "Don't worry, Jayden. I'll ask for some water. Just relax and enjoy, okay?" He nodded gratefully, leaning back into the soft cushion of his seat, comforted by his sister's calm presence. Aaliyah glanced upward at the panel above her, hesitating briefly before pressing the call button, which softly illuminated. Moments later, Ms. Caldwell appeared, her footsteps confident and measured. Aaliyah politely cleared her throat as the flight attendant approached. "Excuse me, miss. Could my brother please have a glass of water? He's thirsty," she asked softly, making sure her voice remained respectful and clear. Miss Caldwell's smile faded ever so slightly as she glanced at the two children, quickly assessing them. Her expression changed subtly, becoming cooler, more distant. She seemed to weigh her words before responding curtly. "We haven't started beverage service yet. You'll need to wait," she replied tersely, her gaze quickly shifting away as she moved past their row without another glance. Aaliyah blinked, caught off guard by the abruptness of Ms. Caldwell's response. She felt a slight tightening in her chest, a feeling of unease that she quickly dismissed, attributing it to her own nervousness. After all, maybe the attendant was just busy, overwhelmed by her duties, or simply having a difficult moment. She turned to Jayden, gently placing her hand on his arm. "We just have to wait a little longer, okay?" "It won't be too long." Jayden nodded understandingly, but his discomfort was obvious. His small fingers nervously twisted together as he tried not to complain. Aaliyah's heart tugged slightly, wishing she could make him comfortable immediately. Minutes passed slowly as the plane finally began its smooth climb into the bright afternoon sky. Aaliyah continued to observe Miss Caldwell carefully as she began the official beverage service, elegantly balancing trays of sparkling juices, crystal clear water, and delicate glasses of wine. She served the businessman across the aisle quickly, effortlessly filling his glass without hesitation, smiling broadly as he thanked her politely. When another passenger, a woman in a silk scarf, requested an additional snack, Miss Caldwell immediately complied, her voice warm and accommodating. Aaliyah watched carefully, waiting for her turn. When the attendant finally returned down their aisle, she once again gently lifted her hand, hoping to catch her attention. "Excuse me, Miss Caldwell, may we please have that glass of water now? My brother is really thirsty," Aaliyah asked again, her tone polite and carefully controlled, despite the rising sense of unease. This time, Miss Caldwell paused briefly, her eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. She barely looked at them, her expression colder than before, her voice dismissive. "I already told you, young lady, you'll have to wait your turn," she replied curtly, before turning sharply on her heel and walking away without another word. Aaliyah felt a sudden chill ripple down her spine. It wasn't the words, but the way Ms. Caldwell had said them, the undeniable edge of disdain, the subtle implication that they didn't belong here. It was a feeling she'd experienced before, though never so directly, never so clearly. She glanced quickly at Jayden, noticing the hurt confusion in his eyes, and felt a protective instinct flare brightly within her chest. She couldn't explain why the attendant was behaving this way, but one thing was becoming painfully clear. This wasn't simply a misunderstanding. It was something else entirely. With determination tightening her young jaw, Aaliyah reached into her backpack, pulled out her phone, and quickly typed a message to her father. "Dad, something's wrong. The flight attendant won't give us water. I think she's ignoring us on purpose." She paused briefly, staring at the screen, uncertain how her father would react, yet sensing deep inside her that Miss Caldwell had just made a mistake she might soon deeply regret. She hit send, taking a slow, steadying breath. This wasn't over, not yet. In fact, it was only just beginning. Aaliyah Carter sat quietly in her first-class seat, excitement sparkling in her wide, innocent eyes as she gazed out at the bustling airport runway. At 12 years old, this was her first time flying first class, a special gift from her father, Marcus Carter, a powerful businessman known throughout the country, but to Aaliyah, simply her protective, caring dad. Beside her, nestled comfortably in his oversized seat, her younger brother Jayden, only 8, swung his legs gently, unable to contain his enthusiasm. "Look, Jay," Aaliyah whispered softly, pointing toward the window. "That airplane is taking off next. That'll be us soon." Jayden's eyes widened, a delighted smile spreading across his small face. "Wow! I've never seen so many airplanes before," he whispered back, his voice filled with awe. She smiled gently, sharing his excitement while feeling a surge of pride. They had both worked incredibly hard at school, and their father had insisted on this special trip to celebrate their achievements. Marcus Carter was a name known in boardrooms across America, respected and powerful, but at home he was warm, loving, and protective, instilling in his children values of kindness, respect, and dignity. "Are you thirsty, Jay?" Aaliyah asked gently, noticing him licking his lips nervously. "We can ask for some water." Jayden nodded shyly. "Yes, please." With practiced politeness, Aaliyah reached out and pressed the attendant call button. A soft chime echoed gently above her seat. She sat patiently, hands folded neatly in her lap, glancing back at the aisle to see if anyone was approaching. The first-class cabin bustled with quiet efficiency, flight attendants moving gracefully among passengers, offering warm smiles and attentive conversation. Miranda Foster, the lead flight attendant, was particularly radiant, her friendly voice ringing out warmly as she spoke to each passenger. "May I offer you something to drink, Mr. Anderson?" Miranda leaned towards a distinguished gentleman in an expensive suit, her smile perfectly genuine, effortlessly warm. Aaliyah watched carefully, admiring Miranda's grace as she anticipated the attendant reaching their row next. When Miranda stepped closer, the children straightened in their seats, politely prepared. However, the warmth and friendliness abruptly disappeared from Miranda's eyes as her gaze settled on the Carter siblings. The change in Miranda's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. Her expression hardened, the easy charm replaced by icy indifference. Without even acknowledging the illuminated call button or looking directly at them, Miranda turned sharply and continued walking. Aaliyah felt a slight pang of confusion. Perhaps Miranda hadn't noticed? She exchanged an uncertain glance with Jayden, whose eyes mirrored her confusion. "Maybe she's busy," Aaliyah reassured softly. "We'll wait a moment." Minutes passed, and the plane began taxiing towards the runway, the engines humming beneath their seats. Once airborne, the attendants resumed their rounds, gracefully delivering sparkling waters, juices, and elegant trays of snacks to the passengers around them. Once more, Miranda moved through the cabin. Her smile returned as she leaned toward a woman draped in pearls, her laughter gentle and warm. "Another glass of champagne for you, Mrs. Reynolds?" Aaliyah took a steadying breath, raising her hand gently to capture Miranda's attention as the attendant neared again. Her voice was soft, careful not to disturb other passengers. "Excuse me, ma'am. Could my brother and I please have some water?" Miranda paused for only a fraction of a second, her expression turning cold as she turned slightly toward Aaliyah. "I'll get to you when I have a chance," she said curtly, and before Aaliyah could reply, Miranda immediately turned to serve the white passenger sitting directly beside them, her smile returning instantly, as if nothing unusual had just happened. Aaliyah's stomach tightened, a hollow feeling spreading within her. She glanced at Jayden, noticing the innocent confusion in his eyes. "Why didn't she stop?" he whispered uncertainly, his voice small and anxious. "It's okay," Aaliyah soothed him, her voice soft but her heart pounding uncomfortably. "I'm sure she'll be back soon." Around them, several passengers shifted uncomfortably. A few subtly turned their heads away, avoiding eye contact, deliberately ignoring the situation. Aaliyah's chest felt tight, embarrassment burning her cheeks. She had been polite. She'd done nothing wrong. Why was Miranda treating them differently? Beside her, a silver-haired older gentleman named James Whitaker had noticed the entire exchange. He hesitated, clearly troubled. He caught Aaliyah's gaze for a brief second before turning away, indecision clear in his posture. Aaliyah, gathering her courage, pressed the call button again. This time, Emily Collins, a younger flight attendant with a kinder face, approached. Emily leaned slightly forward, her voice gentle. "How may I assist you?" "We asked for water," Aaliyah replied quietly, her voice tinged with a mix of confusion and hope. "My brother is thirsty." Emily hesitated, glancing anxiously back towards Miranda, who stood near the galley, her eyes narrowing sharply. Aaliyah watched as Emily reached for a bottle of water, but before her hand could close around it, Miranda's voice cut through sharply. "Leave it," Miranda ordered, her voice low and cold, clearly audible in the immediate silence. Passengers nearby stiffened, several glancing uneasily toward the confrontation. But Emily began hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable, glancing at the siblings, empathy briefly flickering in her eyes. "I said leave it," Miranda repeated firmly, her tone brooking no argument. Emily looked away, avoiding Aaliyah's eyes. With a quiet nod, she reluctantly stepped back, returning empty-handed toward the front of the cabin. Aaliyah felt tears of embarrassment and frustration pricking behind her eyes. Jayden shifted anxiously beside her, hurt and confusion evident on his small face. "Why won't she help us, Aaliyah?" Jayden's voice trembled softly, pain clearly audible, his innocent question cutting straight to her heart. Aaliyah reached out, gently taking her brother's small hand, offering comfort even as she fought back her own tears. She was older, she needed to stay strong for him, but deep inside, anger and sadness coiled within her. She had done nothing wrong. All she'd asked for was a glass of water. James Whitaker, the older man seated nearby, finally leaned slightly toward Aaliyah. His voice was quiet and tinged with regret. "I saw everything. She's intentionally ignoring you, isn't she?" Aaliyah nodded quietly, her voice shaking slightly as she replied, "I think so." James sighed heavily, guilt clear in his tired eyes. "Would you like me to say something?" For a moment, Aaliyah hesitated, looking around at the cabin full of people, deliberately avoiding their eyes, pretending nothing was wrong. She knew one thing clearly now. This wasn't just about water. It was something much deeper, darker, and more painful. She turned back, her voice firm despite the turmoil inside. "No, thank you, sir. My father will handle it." And in that instant, she knew the flight attendant Miranda Foster had made a terrible mistake, one she would soon deeply regret. Aaliyah felt her pulse quicken, her throat dry from embarrassment and frustration. She glanced again at Jayden, whose small shoulders trembled slightly, his eyes staring down at his lap, hurt and confusion visible on his young face. Aaliyah's fingers shook as she reached for the phone tucked safely in her small travel bag. Enough was enough. She opened the text conversation with her father, Marcus Carter, her heart pounding heavily in her chest. Her fingers flew quickly, carefully selecting her words to capture the severity of the situation, yet remaining respectful. "Dad, Jayden and I asked politely for water several times, but the flight attendant refuses to serve us. She's deliberately ignoring us. What should I do?" She stared at the message for a brief second, hesitating only slightly before pressing send. Her stomach tightened anxiously as she watched the message deliver. How would her father handle this from miles below on the ground? She had always admired him, not just because he was a successful, respected businessman, but because he commanded respect through his calm, steady presence. Barely seconds passed before her phone vibrated sharply in her hands, startling her. She quickly glanced down, breath catching, as she read his short, authoritative response. "Sit tight, I'll handle this." Aaliyah exhaled, suddenly feeling an intense wave of relief wash over her, even as questions raced through her mind. How would he manage this from so far away? What did "I'll handle this" truly mean? She turned to Jayden, gently squeezing his hand in quiet reassurance. "It's okay, Jay," she whispered softly, projecting confidence she didn't fully feel yet. "Daddy's taking care of it." Jayden's big, innocent eyes glanced up at her, trusting his older sister implicitly. "Okay," he whispered softly, still uncertain, but visibly comforted by Aaliyah's quiet strength. Just as she began to relax slightly, the intercom crackled sharply, breaking the hushed silence of the cabin. The captain's voice filled the air, professional yet undeniably stern. "Miranda Foster, report immediately to the cockpit, please." The sudden announcement hung heavily in the first-class cabin, startling passengers into quiet, confused whispers. Miranda stiffened visibly near the front galley, her usually composed posture suddenly tense. For the first time since boarding, she appeared shaken, eyes widening slightly in surprise. Passengers around exchanged curious glances, sensing something unusual unfolding. Aaliyah watched closely, her heart racing, as Miranda straightened her uniform nervously, her usually confident steps now visibly hesitant. Miranda swallowed, eyes darting around briefly, before forcing a facade of calm professionalism. Yet beneath the mask, anxiety was unmistakable. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Miranda moved toward the cockpit, her heels clicking sharply on the cabin floor, each step echoing ominously. The curtains separating the cabin from the cockpit swayed gently as she disappeared behind it. The cabin settled into an uneasy silence, punctuated only by nervous murmurs and the low hum of engines. Aaliyah exhaled slowly, anticipation tightening her chest. Whatever was happening, her father had somehow set it in motion, powerful enough to send the lead attendant immediately to the cockpit. It was becoming clear to everyone on board, this was no ordinary reprimand. Minutes stretched uncomfortably long, the tension in the cabin palpable. Jayden fidgeted nervously beside her, his small fingers curled tightly around the armrests. The older gentleman, James Whitaker, leaned slightly closer again, voice low and reassuring. "I think your father just made a big move," he murmured quietly, approval evident in his tone. Aaliyah nodded slowly, heart pounding. Marcus Carter never did anything halfway. If he'd stepped in, it meant consequences were imminent. She sat up straighter, quietly preparing herself for what would come next. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the cockpit curtain parted abruptly, revealing Miranda Foster emerging slowly. Her previous confidence had visibly evaporated. Now, her steps were cautious, almost shaky, her usually impeccable appearance marred by flushed cheeks and wide, anxious eyes. The atmosphere in the cabin grew intensely quiet, eyes following Miranda's every move as she approached Aaliyah and Jayden's seats. For the first time since boarding, Miranda hesitated, standing awkwardly in the aisle, avoiding eye contact for a painful moment. Finally, she cleared her throat softly, forcing herself to look directly at Aaliyah. "Do you still want the water?" Miranda asked stiffly, voice barely concealing irritation and discomfort. Aaliyah's voice remained steady, calm but firm. She fixed Miranda with a direct gaze, holding the silence for a moment before replying, clearly audible for those around to hear. "Why now?" she asked quietly yet firmly, her voice filled with controlled dignity. "Why do you suddenly want to serve us after deliberately ignoring us multiple times?" Miranda's jaw tightened visibly, embarrassment flooding her face, cheeks burning with shame. She glanced around quickly, noticing how intently passengers were now watching. Several looked away awkwardly, but more stared directly, openly acknowledging the uncomfortable. It was a misunderstanding," Miranda stammered, attempting weakly to recover her composure, her eyes betraying a rare vulnerability. "I'm sorry if you misunderstood my intentions." Aaliyah shook her head slowly, calmly yet resolutely challenging Miranda's attempt to deflect. "No, you chose to ignore us deliberately. You refused to help my brother when he was thirsty. We both saw it." A thick, uncomfortable silence filled the cabin, passengers visibly tense, realizing they were witnessing something profound. Miranda, for the first time, had no easy escape, no graceful exit. Miranda stood motionless, her eyes darting nervously around, desperately searching for support but finding none. The polite veneer of civility had shattered, exposing a truth long ignored but deeply felt. Aaliyah, young yet wise beyond her years, had spoken openly what many passengers were privately thinking. Finally, Miranda swallowed, forcing out a strained, clearly reluctant apology. "I apologize for my behavior," she admitted, voice trembling slightly. "It was unprofessional." Aaliyah did not immediately reply, her gaze steady, measuring the sincerity of Miranda's words. Every passenger waited, holding their breath, sensing the significance of the next moment. Calmly, with quiet dignity, Aaliyah spoke clearly. "I appreciate the apology, but I don't accept it, not until I know it's sincere." Miranda's eyes widened, humiliation coloring her expression as whispers rippled quietly through the cabin. Without another word, the flight attendant turned stiffly, retreating quickly back toward the galley, leaving behind a tense silence that hung heavily over every passenger. Aaliyah slowly leaned back, taking Jayden's hand reassuringly once more. Her pulse gradually steadied, a strange calm washing over her. This was not how she'd imagined their first-class flight, yet somehow she knew it was important, that it mattered. For the first time, everyone aboard had witnessed someone standing up against casual discrimination, confronting it with dignity and grace. Beside her, Jayden whispered softly, his voice full of quiet admiration. "You were brave, Aaliyah." She squeezed his hand gently, realizing for the first time just how powerful her voice could be. And somewhere far below, she knew her father was smiling, proud and determined, readying himself to finish what his daughter had bravely begun. Marcus Carter stood in the expansive terminal of JFK International Airport, his expression calm but coldly authoritative, his gaze locked onto the jet bridge entrance. Behind him stood two of the most seasoned corporate lawyers in New York and an elite security detail, their presence alone turning the bustling airport into an atmosphere thick with tension. Aaliyah and Jayden remained seated quietly in the first-class cabin, obeying their father's strict instruction, "Stay seated until I arrive." Their small hands gripped the armrests, hearts racing, still uncertain exactly what their father had planned, but trusting his firm assurance. Around them, passengers who had witnessed Miranda Foster's blatant discrimination now stole uneasy glances, whispering softly amongst themselves. The siblings had become the center of attention, not by choice, but through a cruel circumstance they never expected. Outside the aircraft, Marcus's phone buzzed repeatedly, vibrating with urgent messages from the airline's CEO, Richard Bennett. Marcus didn't glance at it. He knew precisely why Bennett was calling, and the airline had missed its chance to quietly resolve things. He wasn't interested in polite assurances anymore. It was too late for promises. Now he demanded action. The cabin door hissed open sharply. Miranda Foster appeared first, stepping onto the jet bridge confidently at first, but freezing in her steps when her eyes met Marcus's steely gaze. Immediately behind her, two senior airline executives entered the aircraft. The passengers in first class instantly fell silent, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. "Miss Foster," the first executive, a sharply dressed woman holding a clipboard, said calmly yet forcefully, "We need you to leave the plane immediately." Miranda's jaw tightened visibly, confusion battling humiliation on her face. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "I'm still on duty," she replied, trying to maintain an illusion of control, her voice shaking slightly at the edges. "This isn't up for debate," said the second executive, a tall man with silver hair, his voice clipped and firm. "Gather your things now." Every passenger watched with wide eyes as Miranda, her face drained of color, reluctantly reached for her belongings. Nobody spoke. No colleague stepped forward to defend her. Her earlier arrogance had vanished entirely, replaced by an unmistakable fear. As Miranda exited the plane, escorted off with quiet urgency by the two executives, the passengers inside shifted nervously in their seats, exchanging incredulous glances. Then, just as silence threatened to engulf the cabin again, two imposing security guards entered, their presence immediately dominating the space. One guard stepped forward, looking directly at Aaliyah and Jayden. His voice was gentle but commanding. "Miss Aaliyah, Mr. Jayden, please come with us. Your father is waiting." Whispers erupted around them, the passengers now understanding the gravity of the situation. The older man, James Whitaker, who had earlier watched silently, gave the children a small nod of approval and a reassuring smile. Aaliyah felt her shoulders straighten slightly as she led her brother out, head held high, refusing to allow the embarrassment she'd felt earlier to define her now. As they emerged onto the jet bridge, the siblings immediately saw their father. Marcus Carter stood tall, immovable, his dark eyes blazing with silent fury as Miranda Foster stood awkwardly to the side, avoiding his gaze entirely. Aaliyah and Jayden moved swiftly toward him, instantly comforted by the solid grip of his large hands, clasping theirs. Marcus leaned down briefly, whispering gently but firmly, "You did exactly the right thing. I'm proud of you both." He then straightened, his gaze shifting sharply toward CEO Richard Bennett, who had just arrived, breathless and visibly shaken. Bennett attempted to compose himself, adjusting his tie nervously, the usual charm in his voice replaced by cautious hesitation. "Marcus, I apologize deeply for this misunderstanding." Marcus held up a hand, silencing Bennett instantly. "Misunderstanding?" Marcus's voice was dangerously calm, each syllable carefully enunciated. "Your airline openly humiliated my children based solely on their skin color. Is that your definition of a misunderstanding, Mr. Bennett?" Passengers who were exiting the aircraft paused, their eyes widening as they realized the intensity of the confrontation unfolding. Airport staff slowed their steps, unable to look away. Bennett swallowed hard, his voice shaking slightly. "Of course not, Marcus. We're handling this internally, and I promise you—" "Promises mean nothing," Marcus interrupted sharply, stepping closer, his voice resonating with cold, unyielding authority. "I did not come here for your apologies or vague assurances. You have allowed a culture of discrimination to fester, unchecked, on your planes." Bennett paled visibly. Around him, his executive team shifted uneasily, their eyes fixed firmly on the floor. Marcus continued, his voice unwavering. "This airline, under your leadership, has quietly permitted behavior like Miranda Foster's to go unpunished for too long. But today, you made the critical mistake of targeting my children." His tone lowered further, almost a whisper, yet every word carried clearly to the ears of everyone present. "Today, I promise you, that mistake will cost you more dearly than you can imagine." Bennett opened his mouth to reply, but Marcus cut him off once more. "Within the hour, your airline will issue a public statement clearly outlining the immediate termination of Miranda Foster, mandatory retraining for every single member of your crew in anti-discrimination protocols, and direct accountability measures for leadership. If you fail to deliver these exact demands, not only will I withdraw every cent I've invested into your airline, but I will also ensure that every major media outlet hears firsthand from my children about exactly how your airline treats passengers who don't fit your preferred profile." Complete silence descended upon the corridor. Marcus let his words hang heavily, allowing their significance to fully penetrate. Then he turned, placing a protective hand on each of his children's shoulders. Without looking back, he began guiding them away, leaving Bennett standing frozen, his face flushed red in humiliation and defeat. As the family walked toward the waiting private vehicle, Marcus glanced down at Aaliyah and Jayden, his expression softening into deep pride. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly but resolutely. "Today, we make sure they remember forever that respect isn't something reserved only for those who look a certain way." Behind them, airport staff and passengers watched in awe as Marcus Carter and his children disappeared into the night, the echoes of his powerful words lingering like a storm, yet to fully break. Aaliyah sat silently in the plush leather seat inside the private car, watching as the lights of the airport blurred past the window. Beside her, Jayden had been quiet since leaving the aircraft. His small hand was tightly gripping the edge of his seat, eyes staring blankly ahead, still processing everything that had just unfolded. The weight of silence in the vehicle was heavy, interrupted only by the soft hum of the engine and the distant muffled sounds of traffic. Marcus, sitting directly across from his children, carefully studied their expressions. His normally composed face now showed a tenderness that only appeared when he was alone with his children, away from the demanding world of corporate America. Gently, Marcus reached over and touched Jayden's shoulder. "Jayden, are you okay?" The boy's small frame shuddered slightly, his eyes filling with tears that he had bravely fought back throughout the humiliating ordeal. He turned slowly to face his father, his bottom lip trembling. I was afraid nobody would believe us, Dad," Jayden whispered, his voice breaking with raw vulnerability. "When that lady kept ignoring Aaliyah, everyone saw it, but nobody said anything. I thought, maybe we were the ones doing something wrong." Marcus's heart ached fiercely at Jayden's words. He immediately moved forward, gently cupping his son's face in his strong, comforting hands. "You listen to me, Jayden," Marcus spoke, his voice firm but gentle, eyes unwavering. "You did nothing wrong. Nothing. Both of you handled yourselves exactly as you should have. What happened on that plane, how that woman treated you, was wrong. And I promise you both, everyone will know it. Nobody will ever doubt you again." Jayden leaned forward into his father's embrace, releasing the tears he had fought so bravely to hold back. Marcus wrapped his arms protectively around his son, rubbing his back gently, silently comforting him as the boy softly cried. Beside them, Aaliyah sat quietly, her own eyes burning with tears of relief mixed with lingering sadness. She felt the weight of her brother's pain deeply, but she also felt something else, something new, powerful, stirring inside her heart. The car had come to a gentle stop at a traffic light, the red glow illuminating the quiet interior in a soft, warm light. It was at that moment that Marcus noticed someone gently tapping on the window of the vehicle. Startled, he looked up and saw an older man, the passenger who had been seated across the aisle from his children on the flight. James Whitaker stood on the sidewalk, hesitating slightly, his face etched with regret and sincerity. Marcus, recognizing him from earlier, opened the window slowly, his expression cautious yet curious. James cleared his throat nervously, leaning in slightly. "Mr. Carter, I hope you don't mind. I saw you getting into your car and, well, I had to say something." Marcus gave him a careful nod. "Go ahead." James turned his gentle eyes toward the back seat, meeting Aaliyah's gaze directly. His expression softened deeply as he addressed her. "Young lady, I wanted to apologize to you personally. On that flight, I saw exactly what was happening, but I stayed silent." He paused, voice shaking slightly. "I convinced myself it wasn't my place. I was wrong, terribly wrong. You and your brother deserved better. You deserved my voice." Aaliyah watched him closely, understanding and compassion gradually replacing the hurt she'd been holding on to. She gave James a soft nod. "Thank you for saying that," she whispered gently. James gave a sad, reflective smile. "No, thank you, Aaliyah. Because of your bravery, I'll never let my silence speak louder than my voice again." James stepped back slowly from the vehicle, giving Marcus a respectful nod of acknowledgement before quietly disappearing into the evening crowd. Inside the car, Aaliyah looked back at her brother, who was wiping his tears and now gazing at her with wide eyes. She reached out her hand, firmly taking his smaller one in hers. "Did you hear what he said, Jayden?" she asked softly, her voice steady but deeply emotional. "That man realized something important tonight, and it was because of you and me. Because we spoke up, even when it felt scary, even though some people didn't listen at first. Now they have to." Jayden nodded slowly, absorbing the power of his sister's words. His tears had dried, replaced now by a thoughtful expression that seemed far beyond his young years. "Do you think it'll really change, Aaliyah?" Aaliyah squeezed her brother's hand gently, meeting his eyes with a determined look. "Maybe not all at once, but tonight we started something, and now they can't ignore us anymore. Now everyone who saw what happened knows that it's not okay. Now they'll listen, because we made them." Marcus, listening silently, felt a deep pride swell in his chest. His daughter's strength amazed him, her voice filled with conviction and maturity. He placed his hand over theirs, sealing the family together in that powerful moment. "I promise you both," Marcus said firmly, his voice steady and filled with resolve. "This is just the beginning. Nobody will ever treat you like that again without consequences, and we won't stop fighting until every child, every person knows they have the right to be respected and heard." The car resumed moving, rolling gently forward into the warm night. Outside, city lights sparkled, oblivious to the powerful shift that had just taken place within its streets. But inside, the Carter family sat together, united not just by the pain they'd experienced, but by the unbreakable bond of courage, dignity, and the unwavering belief that their voices mattered. And tonight, the world had no choice but to listen. Aaliyah looked out the window as their car glided smoothly through the city streets. The buildings were aglow with evening lights, casting shimmering reflections across the glass, but her thoughts were far away from the beauty outside. Her mind lingered on the question her father had gently placed before her moments earlier: whether she wanted to speak publicly, to stand and let the world know their story. Marcus watched his daughter quietly, waiting patiently for her decision. Beside him, Jayden, exhausted from the ordeal, had finally fallen asleep with his head leaning softly against Marcus's shoulder. The innocence of the boy's peaceful expression contrasted sharply with the seriousness of the conversation unfolding. "Aaliyah," Marcus began gently, "you don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But understand this: your voice holds power. If you choose to speak, they'll listen. Not just because you're my daughter, but because your courage today showed them something they weren't prepared to face." Aaliyah took a deep breath, weighing her father's words. Her heart fluttered nervously, aware of what speaking publicly would mean. The story would no longer be hers alone. It would belong to everyone who had ever felt unheard, unwanted, or unseen. After a moment, she turned to face her father, her eyes bright with newfound determination. "I'll do it, Dad. Not just for Jayden and me, but for all the kids who might not have someone like you standing behind them. They need to know someone out there understands and cares enough to say something." Marcus felt pride swell deeply in his chest as he squeezed her hand gently. "You're making the right choice, Aaliyah, and I'll be right by your side every step of the way." Underscore 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 in underscore 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 underscore. The next morning, the sun rose over the city, painting the sky with soft strokes of gold and orange, symbolic of new beginnings. Outside the headquarters of the airline, a podium stood ready, surrounded by reporters and flashing cameras. News had spread quickly, and people from all backgrounds gathered, eager to hear firsthand the powerful voice of a young girl whose simple request had sparked national attention. Aaliyah stood just off to the side, her father's reassuring hand resting gently on her shoulder. Beside them, Jayden held Marcus's other hand, his young eyes wide with wonder at the size of the crowd. Marcus knelt down to speak softly to his son. "Remember, Jayden, your sister is brave, and so are you. Both of you stood strong yesterday, and I'm proud of you," Marcus said warmly. Jayden nodded solemnly, his small hand gripping Marcus's tighter. "I'm proud of Aaliyah too," he said softly, his voice filled with admiration. Taking a deep breath, Aaliyah stepped toward the podium, her footsteps steady and resolute. Immediately the crowd fell silent, all eyes turning toward the young girl standing tall and unwavering before them. "My name is Aaliyah Carter," she began clearly, her voice calm but strong. "And this is my brother Jayden. Yesterday we experienced something no one, especially not children, should ever experience. We asked for something simple, a glass of water. Instead, we received silence, disrespect, and humiliation." She paused briefly, letting her words sink into the attentive audience, her gaze unwavering as she continued. What happened to us wasn't just about being ignored. It wasn't about one person's mistake. It was about a system, a culture, that has allowed too many people to look away when something clearly isn't right. As she spoke, many of the airline's staff, including attendants and managers, stood silently nearby. Among them were faces she recognized. Emily, the young flight attendant who had tried to help, and even Miranda, now humbled and reflective, listening intently to the girl whose dignity she had tried to diminish. "I don't want sympathy or apologies. I want change," Aaliyah continued, her voice growing in confidence and power. "Today, I'm standing up not just for Jayden and myself, but for every single person who's ever felt invisible, ignored, or unworthy. I'm here to make sure our voices, especially the voices of young people and those who have felt powerless, are heard clearly, loudly, and permanently." She paused again, emotion catching in her throat as applause and cheers erupted from the crowd, a spontaneous outpouring of support and solidarity. Behind her, Marcus watched his daughter with immense pride, silently acknowledging the powerful young leader emerging before his very eyes. Jayden, inspired by his sister's courage, stepped forward shyly, taking his sister's hand in his own, his presence a powerful message of unity. Aaliyah glanced down at her brother, smiling softly before concluding firmly, "Today, we choose to be visible, heard, and respected. This airline and every company, school, or place of business must make real changes, not just promises, to ensure no one ever again feels the way we felt." As Aaliyah stepped back from the podium, Marcus moved forward to embrace both of his children, holding them tightly in a powerful moment of family strength. Together, they turned to leave, passing slowly through the gathered crowd, their heads held high. The staff, executives, and even the CEO stood quietly to the side, respectfully parting to let the Carter family pass. Marcus's authoritative presence, combined with the powerful moral clarity of his children, created a palpable sense of awe. James Whitaker, the older gentleman from the flight, stood nearby, nodding with heartfelt respect as they passed. In that moment, those who had once ignored the suffering of two young children now looked on in humbled silence, recognizing their own responsibility in perpetuating silence. The Carter family's quiet dignity and strength became an unspoken reminder to everyone present, never again to stand silent when someone's voice demanded to be heard. As they walked away, Marcus leaned toward his daughter, quietly whispering, "Aaliyah, today you changed the world. I'm so incredibly proud of you." Aaliyah squeezed her father's hand, smiling softly. "No, Dad, we changed it together." Jayden looked up at his sister, smiling brightly for the first time since the ordeal began. "Does this mean things are going to be different now?" he asked, hopefully. "Yes," Aaliyah replied gently, her voice filled with a conviction beyond her years. "Because this time, Jayden, we made them listen." Together, hand in hand, the Carter family walked forward into a world that now seemed just a little more open, a little more understanding, and undeniably more hopeful than it had been just the day before. Aaliyah stood silently in the bustling airport terminal, her hand tightly clasping her little brother Jayden's. The crowd around them moved hurriedly, oblivious to the profound moment unfolding right before their eyes. The high-ranking executives of the airline shuffled awkwardly nearby, their faces a careful mask of shame and discomfort. Marcus Carter, Aaliyah and Jayden's father, stood firmly by their side, exuding a quiet authority that made it clear this moment was not to be forgotten. As the crowd dispersed, one familiar figure lingered near the edge of their group. Emily Collins, the young flight attendant who had almost stood up to Miranda Foster's discrimination on the plane, cautiously stepped forward. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Aaliyah, Jayden," Emily began softly, her voice catching in her throat. "I owe you both an apology, not just for what Miranda did, but for what I didn't do." I saw what was happening. I knew it was wrong, and yet I hesitated. Aaliyah studied Emily's sincere expression carefully, sensing genuine remorse. Jayden looked up, his eyes curious but guarded. Emily took a deep breath before continuing, determined to make her confession count. When we landed, I spoke directly with the executives. I told them everything. I made sure they knew exactly how Miranda treated you and how it wasn't the first time she'd done something like that. I'm going to testify officially during the internal investigation. I want you both to know that your courage made me realize I can't ever stay silent again. Aaliyah felt a small warmth bloom in her chest. She hadn't expected this from Emily, and it felt like another layer of validation, a recognition that her voice had truly mattered. Before she could respond, another figure approached. It was James Whitaker, the older gentleman who had sat across the aisle during the entire flight, quietly observing but never intervening. His eyes carried a gentle sorrow, burdened with the weight of his previous silence. He knelt slightly to be at eye level with Aaliyah, his voice firm yet gentle. "Young lady," he began softly, "today you've taught me one of the most important lessons of my life." Aaliyah tilted her head curiously. "What lesson?" Whitaker's voice deepened, becoming earnest and heartfelt. "That silence is complicity. I sat there today watching what was happening to you and your brother, and I justified doing nothing by thinking it wasn't my place. But I was wrong. From now on, I'll remember your bravery whenever I see someone treated unjustly. I promise you, I will never choose silence again." His words hung in the air, powerful and full of sincerity. Aaliyah nodded slowly, realizing the magnitude of his promise. This moment wasn't just about her and Jayden. It was about all the voices who had been silenced, ignored, or overlooked. Her decision to speak up was already making waves, altering the actions of those around her. Jayden tugged gently at her hand, drawing her attention downward. He looked up at her, his eyes wide and filled with newfound strength. "Aaliyah," he whispered softly, almost reverently, "you were really brave today. You stood up for us, even when it was scary." Aaliyah smiled warmly at her brother, squeezing his hand reassuringly. Jayden paused briefly, then continued, "I don't feel so scared anymore. Because of you, I know I can be brave too. I want to be brave, just like you." A rush of emotion filled her, catching Aaliyah by surprise. Her little brother, who had once hidden shyly behind her whenever things got tough, was now speaking with quiet confidence. It made everything, the tension, embarrassment, and confrontation, feel worth it. Marcus Carter watched this exchange with pride, gently placing a hand on each of his children's shoulders. He spoke with measured authority, yet his voice carried an undeniable tenderness. "I'm proud of you both, not because you confronted an injustice today, but because you showed everyone, powerful or not, that respect is something everyone deserves." He glanced briefly at the airline executives, still lingering uneasily nearby, ensuring they understood his words were meant for them as well. Marcus's eyes locked firmly onto those of the airline's CEO, Richard Bennett, sending a clear message. He would accept nothing less than complete accountability. Richard Bennett stepped forward hesitantly, his demeanor subdued, stripped of the arrogance that had once characterized his authority. "Mr. Carter," Bennett began, his voice controlled but humbled, "I assure you, our airline will change. Today was a wake-up call none of us can ignore. We've started a formal internal investigation, and we promise to implement rigorous anti-discrimination policies, publicly, transparently, and without compromise." Marcus nodded slowly, holding Bennett's gaze. "Good," he responded clearly. "But remember, real change isn't just words, it's action." Bennett acknowledged Marcus's statement with a humble nod. The executives shuffled uncomfortably, keenly aware they were under the intense scrutiny of Marcus Carter, a man whose power wasn't just measured in money or titles, but in the conviction of his values. Around them, passengers who had silently watched the confrontation unfold began stepping forward cautiously. A woman in her 60s approached first, her expression conflicted, yet determined. "Excuse me," she said quietly to Aaliyah. "I was on your flight. I saw everything. I didn't know what to do. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." One by one, other passengers joined her, each expressing regret for their silence. It was a moment of collective awakening, individuals acknowledging their complicity in injustice and vowing to act differently going forward. Aaliyah accepted their apologies graciously but firmly, ensuring each understood that acknowledgement was just the first step. True change required courage, action, and persistence. The small crowd slowly dispersed, leaving Marcus, Aaliyah, and Jayden standing together, the weight of the day finally settling around them. Marcus gently led his children toward the terminal exit, their steps echoing softly on the polished airport floor. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken, soft hues of purple and gold painting the horizon. As they reached their waiting vehicle, Marcus paused, turning to face his children once more. "This isn't over," he reminded them gently, kneeling down to their level. "Speaking up once is powerful, but continuing to speak out, that's how real change happens." Aaliyah considered his words carefully. "Dad," she said earnestly, "I want to speak publicly about this, not just because it happened to us, but because no one should ever feel as helpless as Jayden and I did today." Marcus's eyes shone with pride as he nodded firmly. "Then let's make sure the world hears your voice." In the days that followed, Aaliyah did just that. With Marcus's support, she shared their story with the media, transforming what could have been a quiet, forgotten incident into a national conversation. Comments and messages flooded in, some supportive, some critical, but all of them proof that people were finally paying attention. One comment in particular stood out, deeply touching Aaliyah's heart. It read simply, "I was treated the same way once, and I didn't speak up. I stayed silent because I was afraid no one would believe me. But seeing your courage gives me strength. You spoke up not just for yourself, but for all of us who didn't have the power to do so. Thank you, Aaliyah." As she read those words aloud to Marcus and Jayden, a deep sense of purpose settled within her. Aaliyah realized that this moment, this struggle, had given her something incredibly precious, a chance to inspire others. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You see, Aaliyah, true bravery is contagious. You lit a fire, and now others will carry it forward." She felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes but blinked them back, choosing instead to embrace her newfound strength. Jayden hugged her tightly, his small voice whispering in her ear, "I'm proud of you." Aaliyah smiled gently, pulling him close. "I'm proud of us," she corrected softly. "Because when we stood up, we showed everyone that respect isn't a privilege, it's a right." Marcus nodded approvingly, gazing fondly at his children. And that's how real change begins. They stepped forward together, moving confidently toward a future where their voices would not just be heard, but would resonate loudly enough to create lasting impact. This wasn't just the end of an incident on an airplane, it was the beginning of a movement. Aaliyah's voice, amplified by courage and conviction, would now become a guiding light for others. And though the journey ahead wouldn't always be easy, she knew they were no longer alone. Because when you break the silence, when you stand tall against injustice, you give others the courage to do the same. Aaliyah glanced once more at her brother's hopeful face, felt her father's unwavering presence, and stepped boldly forward, ready to change the world, one voice at a time. In life, moments of injustice often test our courage and character, challenging not just the victim but every silent witness. The story of Aaliyah and Jayden Carter isn't merely about discrimination on a flight. It's a deeper reflection on human dignity, the destructive power of silence, and the transformative strength of speaking up. First, it teaches us a powerful lesson about the devastating impact of silence. The passengers around Aaliyah and Jayden initially chose inaction. Each of them had an opportunity to intervene, yet they hesitated, perhaps out of fear, uncertainty, or simply discomfort. But in that hesitation lies complicity. Silence doesn't remain neutral. It sides with the oppressor, giving injustice room to thrive unchecked. Imagine how different the situation would have been had even one passenger spoken up early on. Just a single voice of support could have changed everything, letting Aaliyah and Jayden know immediately they weren't alone. Instead, the initial silence amplified their sense of isolation, intensifying their humiliation. Silence can wound as deeply as open hostility because it conveys indifference, a subtle yet painful rejection of someone's worth and humanity. Yet, this story also shows us something incredibly hopeful: the remarkable power of courage. Aaliyah, despite her young age, became the voice that shattered the oppressive silence. Her bravery didn't just confront the discrimination she faced, it inspired everyone around her. Her courage reached passengers who previously felt powerless, giving them permission to speak, to reflect, and most importantly, to change. We see this clearly with Emily Collins, the young flight attendant initially paralyzed by fear. Emily recognized the injustice but felt trapped by hierarchical authority and fear of repercussions. Yet witnessing Aaliyah's bravery ignited something within her. Aaliyah's voice didn't just address a single injustice, it empowered Emily to confront deeper systemic issues within her workplace. This ripple effect illustrates how individual courage can initiate widespread transformation. Emily's eventual decision to stand as a witness during the investigation underscores a critical point. Change isn't always immediate, but it's never impossible. One act of courage, one honest moment of accountability, can disrupt cycles of injustice deeply embedded within institutions. By choosing to speak truthfully, Emily set a powerful example for others within her organization, signaling that integrity matters more than comfort or conformity. James Whittaker's journey further exemplifies the profound impact of moral awakening. Initially a silent observer, he realized too late that his neutrality harmed rather than helped. His heartfelt acknowledgement, "Silence is complicity," captures an essential truth. It's never enough to merely witness injustice. True morality demands action. James's renewed commitment to no longer remain silent represents personal growth born from genuine reflection. His lesson is clear. Every person holds the responsibility to stand against wrongdoing, regardless of how uncomfortable or inconvenient it may seem. But perhaps most moving of all was young Jayden's reaction. Initially fearful and confused, Jayden emerged from the experience with newfound courage. Inspired by his sister's example, Jayden promised himself never to fear speaking out again. This moment highlights a powerful message for us all. Courage is contagious. When one person takes a stand, they inspire others to follow suit. Courage, therefore, isn't just an individual trait. It's a communal force capable of transforming entire communities and cultures. Marcus Carter's powerful statement to his children brings the heart of this lesson home clearly. "I'm proud of you, not just because you spoke up, but because you showed the world everyone deserves respect." Marcus emphasized that respect and dignity aren't conditional privileges, they're fundamental human rights. His presence and decisive actions reinforced an invaluable lesson about the responsibilities accompanying power and privilege. Marcus used his authority not just to protect his children, but to challenge a harmful system publicly and uncompromisingly. His actions remind us that power is only meaningful when wielded in service of justice and dignity for all. Yet, beyond individual bravery and responsibility, the greatest lesson is the collective one. Meaningful change requires solidarity. The passengers who later apologized represented an awakening collective conscience. Their expressions of remorse weren't merely apologies, they were declarations of a new awareness, a commitment to solidarity moving forward. This shift in perspective is critical. Injustice thrives in isolation, but weakens when confronted by unified resistance. Aaliyah's decision to share her experience publicly multiplied this impact exponentially. Her voice reached countless others who had silently endured similar humiliations, giving them permission to heal, speak, and demand respect. Her courage transformed private pain into public action, creating lasting, meaningful change far beyond her individual experience. So what can each of us learn and do moving forward? The first step is recognizing that our voices matter. Every single one. When faced with injustice, silence isn't neutrality, it's complicity. Speak up clearly and confidently. You never know who might be empowered by your example. Second, we must examine our biases, challenge unfair systems, and hold ourselves accountable. Whether we're passengers, employees, or leaders, we have a responsibility to promote and protect dignity and equality. If institutions perpetuate discrimination, it's our duty to confront, challenge, and change them, no matter how daunting the task may seem. Third, teach courage and empathy to those around you, especially to younger generations. Model integrity through action, demonstrate bravery through speech. Courage, kindness, and respect aren't just values, they are practices that become stronger when consistently lived. Lastly, recognize that meaningful change requires sustained effort. Today, discrimination on a flight was challenged, but tomorrow, injustices elsewhere await confrontation. We must remain vigilant, vocal, and committed. The struggle against injustice is ongoing, but each victory strengthens the fabric of our shared humanity. Now, I urge you, everyone listening or reading this story, to reflect deeply. How many times have you witnessed injustice and remained silent? How often have you convinced yourself it wasn't your responsibility to speak? Today, I challenge you to make a commitment. Vow to yourself and to others that you will no longer stay silent in the face of injustice. Choose courage over comfort, action over indifference, and solidarity over isolation. Imagine the world we could create if every single person made that promise and kept it. Imagine the injustices we could eliminate, the wounds we could heal, and the dignity we could restore. We all have the power to change the world, but it begins by choosing not to remain silent. Today, inspired by Aaliyah and Jayden's story, let's promise ourselves and each other. I will speak, I will act, I will stand with those who have been silenced, because dignity and respect aren't negotiable. They're fundamental human rights we must defend, today, tomorrow, and every day after. The world changes not simply because of those who create injustices, but because of those who choose courageously to confront them. So, speak loudly, act bravely, and inspire boldly, because your voice, your courage, might just be the spark that ignites a revolution of respect, justice, and dignity for all of us.